All right, so I'm gonna be breaking down this flow VFX edit that I did. Before I start, I will note that the footage was all recorded on a Sony a7 IV. Some of it was shot in 60 FPS, but I believe some was also shot in 24. Generally, all these shots are shots that I took, so to give some insight on this process, different locations, different countries, states, things like that. But getting right into it, if you've watched the video on the Ready Player One edit, I talked about something that I like doing where I like a little bit of glitch to how I do my edits, and one of the main ways I accomplish that is with one frame. So there's tons of tutorials you could look into in regards to one frames, obviously, and the different ways you create them, but they're essentially a concept of making some type of edit to just one frame of a clip, but then when you kind of create a sequence of a bunch of those one frames, whether it's spaces of just no altering to the original footage, or spaces of where it's just a completely black screen, flashes, different types of plugins and effects, it kind of helps create that kind of glitchy look. So that's kind of the approach I took for the first couple of seconds here. So this is the project file that I'm in now. And I will start with, I think this adjustment layer doesn't have anything on it, so we'll ignore that. We're just gonna go to the bottom of the project here. So first, I have this adjustment layer with Displacer Pro. Displacer Pro is just a displacement plugin. It is one of my favorites just because of however it does its displacement, regardless of how you map it. It just always comes out looking really cool. But this layer is my footage layer right here. And this footage is just some footage I took of the trees outside. And then what's happening is I have two things occurring. One, hotspots. So if you saw the other video, you know that I love using hotspots for a lot of things. I start off with 0.7, which is the darkest that hotspots gets. And then I have it going from 0.7 to 0 all the way over here to kind of introduce this clip. Now, one thing that I also mentioned in other videos that I like to do transitions like this, but when I do the one frames on top of it, I do it in two different ways. It's either a one frame where I am duplicating the clip itself on top of itself, making an edit to that, maybe changing the blending mode, or I do the edit in just an adjustment layer to the original footage. And you'll see the reason for that in a second. So if I just solo this, this footage and the hotspot layer, this is all you would see, is just the reveal. And then of course I have vector blur, which is just set to a high value and then keyframed out. So let me make sure I see that here. So I have my vector blur starting at 110, and then it keyframes all the way down to 0 over here. That's what kind of has that kind of bubbly, watery looking texture. So that's what that looks like by itself. Play that back. Which already kind of, when looked at in flash motion, it almost makes it look like the tree is kind of growing out of itself. But obviously, I like my kind of glitch look, so I added some one frames on top of that. Now, obviously the clip itself has the hotspot, so it just gradually rises in from black. But with this adjustment layer right here, I have the footage itself duplicated. So this is this same footage down here, but duplicated. I have it set to color dodge, which is one of the overlay blending modes that you can change right here. If you don't have blending mode available, just make sure you click this widget in the bottom left, and that will give you your blending modes. And in here, I am actually making a modification to this layer itself. So by revealing this layer for a split second, just like that, and then just overlaid it on top with a color dodge to help kind of let it reveal itself. And then I have this Displacer Pro activating across this entire clip. So what happens is, this clip, as you can see, so just for the sake of making it easier to kind of understand what's happening, this is my hotspot, right? since I have my hotspot over this clip, this first clip is only going to, let me solo it again. This first clip is only going to rise in from black, right? But then when I add this clip, so you see right now what I'm looking at, when I add this clip on top of it, obviously this clip isn't affected by the hotspots because it's above it. And then above that is this Displacer Pro layer, which is doing the displacement translation of the X value from 35 down to, I think it should be 0. Yes. And I think I have that on a very sharp graph. Yeah. So that displacer is happening to everything below it. And since this clip is not affected by the hotspots, it has a lot more clarity into what happens. So it kind of pops in really bright for a frame. And then the next frame here, this is just a deep glow and a minimax, which I don't even think the minimax is activated, so ignore the minimax. But just a deep glow set to the default values when you load it in over the entire clip, which as you can see, didn't really do much there, just made things more present. And then you have, which actually did something, I just haven't soloed. So let's take a look at that now. So this is that one flash here due to the Displacer Pro being activated for a quick second on a color dodged layer, which is why you don't see the layer in full color, because if it was normal, you would see everything. This is a color dodge layer, and then Displacer Pro is activating on that for that 1 second, one frame that video is there. And the next frame here is just a glow, which looks like this. And the next frame here is where I have the clip itself duplicated again. So not an adjustment layer, the actual clip itself again. And all I did to do that, just to show you, is on the clip, I did Control D. And then I did Alt, left bracket and right bracket, just to make it cut the front end, back end just to one frame. And then I just moved it up and then color dodged it. So that's one of the ways that I like to quickly just give myself single frames of edits of duplication of the same clip. And then I just color dodge it so that it doesn't just replace the clip, but it kind of superimposes itself over it. And then obviously, because this is this clip again, it has the same Displacer Pro hitting it towards the end of it. And then after that one frame of color dodge overlay, then the original clip finishes its reveal of the vector blur. So that's kind of how that quick transition was done. I actually didn't have the color, I actually didn't have the Displacer Pro revealed just then, so you'll see it with the displacer. So that's what causes that kind of drag there. So without Displacer Pro, with it, then here, we're gonna do without and with, again here, whoops, without and with. So because it's slowly dragging in as a X translate, it's kind of pulling everything to the side to start, and then as it fades in, it's unpulling it, and that's what kind of gives it that right to left drag. And then of course the clip itself, I think does have some time remapping. So as you can see there, it's time remapped to go, I'll show the graph here, but it's time remapped to be really fast and slow down in. And then right here, I have it speed up right when I want that transition to happen. So just like that. All right, so now the next part, which I know this is probably one of the most sought after parts here in terms of how I did this. So one, I use VFX assets from, I think it's Digital or Triune Digital or something like that. I think it's Film Riot. Film Riot over Triune Digital, and then Triune Digital has an Infinity VFX pack. So they have like energy disbursements, sparks disbursements, things like that. Really cool VFX stuff. And it just comes as these kind of black screen overlays of dust. So there's a black screen behind this dust, and it's just the dust there. And you can pop it into your project. With color dodging, I depending on what you want to use. So if you want to change the color of the effects, you would use just a screen or an unmote plugin if you don't want to have it screen, and then tint it, add glows, do whatever you want to do. But in this case, I wanted the actual VFX to almost live in the project and kind of be affected by the colors in there. So I have it color dodged. So that's the kind of disbursement you see here, the little sparks, the little bursts. I just took my assets and then I changed their scales and their positions, their rotations. So you see this one, I had to scale down a little bit, rotate it a little bit to overlay them with what made the most sense. So here's some of the disbursements with no background, just like that. And then when they're color dodged, it gives this cool kind of overlay and it just adds to the impact that's there. Now, to the impact itself, I actually talked about this in the other video. I used a plugin called Flow Motion. And the Flow Motion plugin essentially allows you to set a knot point. So you choose a point inside your footage and set that as your knot point. Let me see if I can find where I have my Flow Motion here. Here it is. Yeah. There it is. And then I think I have Flow Motion again on the end. So essentially, I wanted it to seem like the trees here were being sucked in, and then where it gets sucked in at is where the kind of branch there kind of sprouts out from. And so the way I did that was this adjustment layer has 3 plugins on it. First is Turbulent Displace. Turbulent Displace is a plugin that kind of adds ripples to footage by you turn up your amount. And I don't want to do it because I don't want to affect, or actually, you know what, let's do this. I'm going to increment and save this so that I can do whatever I want without affecting the original project. But the amount here, I will un-keyframe that. When you turn that up, it adds these kind of ripples to your footage. You can play around with the size of it, the complexity, and that will kind of change how the ripples look, whether it's really small ripples, really big ripples. And then what you do is you want to keyframe the amount of displacement in. So in this case, and let me undo, I have it keyframed to go from 0 up to 50. And at the same time, I have my evolution keyframe to go from 0 to 34. The exact number that you go from 0 to doesn't matter for either of those. It's just based on how much turbulence you want to get to. And in evolution, it's because as the turbulence builds in, evolution allows you to make the turbulence kind of change its seed almost as it builds up displacement. So imagine the turbulence is coming in and it's coming in like this, you know, just to give a random shape. It's coming in like this. If you go from in and out, it's just going to do this. But if you have the evolution change, let's say if you have this symbol and evolution makes it do like this, you want the evolution to constantly be changing while it comes in. And by doing that, it gives the ripples life almost, rather than just moving to a spot and stopping. So I have the evolution keyframe so that as the turbulence displace comes in, the ripples have a little bit of life. It's not something you can notice too well with all the other effects happening, but it's something that when layered kind of helps. You might notice it more on the impact in the end here, but it kind of helps emphasize impacts, which is why it's nice to use for edits like this. Then vector blur, once again, I'll always stand by vector blur. I just have that turning up. And then I'm gonna get to this part later in terms of the out of the impact. I'm just gonna focus on the in right now. And then lastly, well, not lastly, oh yeah, I have flow motion, which I set the knot point, which you can see here. If I can get it to, yeah, I set my knot point where it was at is where it was. I don't want it to change, but there, that's where my knot point was. I set it to this point because that's where I wanted it to kind of sink in at. And then you just keyframe up the amount. So flow motion allows you to kind of have your footage converge on a point. So I just set the knot there and had it converge into that point, while also having a deep glow ramp in to help highlight the brighter parts of everything and build into an explosion. Because when you use deep glow, you want to have a quick ramp in and out, and you want to really have like a quick flash, a quick just bang that comes in. So if I look at that graph, that's probably, yeah, a really sharp graph there. This graph is also fairly sharp. I'm going to try to show as many of these graphs as possible, but at the end of the day, I will have the project file available for any who wants to kind of delve into the project themselves and take a look. But yeah, that's the next point there. And then I think that's the last one for that one. It's just the deep glow. Whoops. Just the deep glow going in there. And then for this, I have flow motion coming out, I believe. Let me find where that is at. This is another example of the sparks burst. So this sparks burst is color dodge, but then I have crates unmote, removing the black screen. And then I have BCC tint to add a green color to it. No other settings change. All I did was choose a color that I wanted, just because I like how that green looked with everything. And then just double check I don't have an adjustment layer up here. I do. So a radial blur. So this is going from 0, 51, back to 0. Have the graph pretty sharp. I generally like pretty sharp graphs. And that's because the radial blur is set to zoom. The blur is built like almost like a zoom effect, which is called zoom, where your blurs are coming 3D through the screen towards you. So I have that kind of overlaid over this transition just to help with the kind of zoom in for the motion. Then right at the impact frame, I have just 14 vector blur just knocked right on it. And in here I have Tracery, which I'll get into that. That's nothing crazy in this sense. I'll explain what that is in a second. And then I have this clip here, just because I love one frames. It's a duplication of the footage with color dodge, and it has a Gaussian blur, an edge detect, a vector blur, and a deep glow, which just a couple of random plugins, or dare I say random, but Gaussian blur is doing a blur. Edge detect is a plugin that kind of grabs the outline of things. I did talk about that in the Ready Player One edit too, but you can look into that plugin. It has a lot of uses. In this case, I didn't touch any settings. I just popped it on there. Vector blur, I've already gone through that one. And then deep glow, just to give it a little flash. So I really want that impact to come there. Now, with the stem, I did rotoscope out the stem. And then, of course, it still has a flow motion being applied to it. But before this was affected, let me actually grab all of these. Let me show what this looks like before the effects. Before these effects are added to it, this was quite literally just the footage of the flower rotoscoped. I have a Luma key to keyframe the threshold to go from 255 to 0. Luma key, basically it reveals or keys out or keys in parts of your footage based on the luminance, so dark or light. So I have it set to key out darker, and so it's set to, when you turn up the, I'm pointing like you guys can see, when you turn up the 250, the threshold, it tells it how much of the footage to key out, which just basically means remove, based on what's darker first. So if I go to 0, just to show you, nothing is keyed out. Mind you, this is already rotoscoped, or object matted is what they call it now. And then after rotoscoping, I keyed out starting from the darkest parts to the light and set that as a starting value keyframe, and then have it go from that 255 down to 0 right here. Have that set to, once again, sharp graph. And that's kind of how that reveals itself. And then while that's happening, I have a Gaussian blur, just because I didn't want it to seem too sharp when it revealed itself. So that blur kind of just blurs the shape itself. It's gonna eventually have an opacity to disappear and reveal the actual clip with the full in focus fern. I just wanted the Gaussian blur for the transition. And then flow motion. So this is the inverse. I set a knot to the middle, and then I keyframe it zoomed in first and have it coming out from zoomed in. and that's what helps with that movement. And then, of course, because the flower is already moving from the right to the left, it kind of give it that snatch down impact. Especially with the regular motion to slow motion, it really helped it sell the impact as it slowed out there. So there you go. So it's, when you see it all together, it sells the effect very well. But of course, when you break it down, then it's like, oh, that looks like exactly what that is. So, and then also, once again, the one frame here with a little flash that helps sell the effect. And then the VFX is just always a nice touch. Now, to go back to Tracery, which is here, Tracery is a plugin that basically grabs the threshold of how much of a color exists, and then it replicates Touch Designer's blob tracking node, which I did experiment with a long time ago, but since Tracery exists now, there's no need to experiment with that, at least from an After Effects perspective. But if you are familiar with blob tracker, that's exactly what this is. So based on what color you key, it's going to detect that color in the project, and it's going to basically track that color's position. What you could do on top of that is, because it's tracking it, you can now set bounding boxes, tracker lines, arrows, all these different types of settings to follow it. I have a very specific settings that I use for this, but I'm not gonna go too deep into that because it's honestly trivial to the actual transitions. It's just a nice little texture, just to even show you, it's just this little boxes and letters. I like the texture because I just like things that look techy, but it does not make or break this edit. So now after this, our VFX assets kind of disperse there and go away, once again pointing like you guys can see. And then I have the time remap to speed up really quickly here. While that happens, I have a couple of overlay one frames. So I have this, which looks like this, which is just some other footage that I took of just low shutter speed kind of shakes to get those light drags. So I think I did like a 1/8 shutter speed, and it was just trees outside and stuff like that. And I have this set to color dodge over it, which what helps it kind of blend into the project. Then I have the next frame is another scene from a similar footage with a tritone of green, just because I wanted to get all those blues out of there. I wanted it to kind of match the project more. So, and then at this point, I have the next footage coming in, but it is color dodged, which is why you can still see the fern clip below it, because it's color dodged, just to help it kind of blend more. And then of course, after 1-2 frames, that fern clip is gone. And now we just have this clip coming in. I did do a couple of one frames here. So here I have a directional blur, and here another directional blur. The blur amount I did not change. I just changed the angle to match the angle that everything was going up to the top right. So nothing crazy there. To help with sell the introduction here, because this clip was not blurred before for the movement, I really wanted to sell the jump into this. And then I do have that time remapped, I believe, to kind of slow down coming in. Then for this next scene, quick one frame of a flash, brightness and exposure, which actually I ended up not using that. It was just like that. I prefer to just jump in. So duplicated the clip and scaled it in. So before, scale was 134. Here, scale is 38, which is kind of a big jump. So something else may have had to happen there, probably because I have some null tracking coming to this point. But yeah, so quick little jump there. And then I have this layer set to my null 25 here. And that null has the directions to do a position and scale automation, scaling the first footage down along with the second footage. So sometimes when you're working in 2D footage and you want to have a short section that's kind of like 3D without worrying about actually making a 3D scene and worry about playing with cameras, one of the cool tricks to kind of give that depth perception is to use scale automation. So in this case, all I did was scale down this footage in the back, while also simultaneously scaling down this footage. And by tying both of the footage here, so you see here, this footage right here, and this footage, which is one in the back, to the same null, by tying them to each other and putting them on the same null. So let's say I have this footage by itself. I'm gonna solve it with the null. All I did was link it to the null and then keyframe the null to say, okay, scale down and position it to the left. And that's what it looks like. So scale down, move to the left. And then when I do that, if I reveal this clip now, let's just say if I'm editing right now, I just place this clip on the screen. If I then link this clip at this playhead to the same null, it will listen to it in reverse if I scroll backwards. So it will say, okay, I see that this was instructed to scale down and move to the left. So now if I move here, so once again, I'll remove this clip just so that I can explain what's happening. So let's say, okay, I'm gonna scale this down and left. Okay, and now I want, when that happens, I want another clip to come in with it. So I load in my clip, just like this, and then I link it to the null at this point, at the end of that movement, so that when you move backwards, it follows it. And then all you have to do is rotoscope out your object that you kind of want to appear in front. I know that's kind of hard to see, but I do have the rotoscope there. And then you want to slowly, so now if you look, you have these two clips of the rotoscope. But then you obviously don't want to keep seeing this back clip because you want to transition. So then you have the same footage duplicated here, but this one has no masking, no rotoscoping, and just set a keyframe to have that gradient wipe itself. So gradient wipe is just kind of like a reveal transition. So transition completion is 100, means it's gone. Transition completion 0 means it's there. So I have this go from 100 to 0 to slowly reveal itself as they both follow the scale and position null. After that, the next movement was of course a wipe. This is a very simple transition. All that's happening here is you see this is tied to, let me undo these. All that's happening here is because this is listening to this. So I have 91 linked to 90 just because I wanted to make sure that when I did this transition, the clip that was gonna reveal the background along with the foreground that it masked off of it, I wanted to make sure that it stayed wherever it was. But that also means that since it's linked to, since 91 is linked to 90 and 91 is linked to 25, I can still control this clip using 25. So in null 25, I told it, hey, take directions from 24. Went to 24 and told it to move from right to left. And then what I did was, so imagine, just to show you how these nulls work. So this is my next footage here. I said, hey, move from right to left. And then I said, okay, and when you do that, I want you to reveal this clip. So from this playhead point, I load the clip in just like that. I'm like, okay, but I want the same thing to happen to reverse. When it moves from right to left, I want this to come in from right to left as well. So I link it from here. And when I move backwards, because it's linked to follow the motion in reverse, when it plays forward, it completes the motion through. So that's kind of one way to use nulls at the end of a sequence to kind of bring it in to have a movement follow. So you load in your first clip, create your null and your movement. And when you get here, you would load in this clip, link it to the null so that it copies the movement going backwards too. And that's what helps the transition go. And then as that is happening, I have adjustment layer, that one's not being used. I have a blur happening real quick. I know there's a black screen. The blur was there before I did a black screen. And then I did the hotspots. So hotspots is going from 0 to 0.3, back to 0. So it's just making everything go dark and then brighten back up. That way I can sell the movement without worrying about any intermittent stuff. Okay. Next, we have this clip, which in this clip, I do have Twixtor on it. Twixtor is just a plugin that helps kind of insert in between frames. I have it set to the frame rate of the footage recorded. I have it set to motion weighted blend, and I have the warping set to forward. So that's what allows me to have this plugin kind of be in slow motion, or this footage be in slow motion. And then I have the time remap move from a really fast beginning. So I will show how I did that here. So in a time remap, if you want it to be really fast, you create keyframes and they basically keyframe a point in time. So I keyframe, like for instance here, I move forward, keyframe here, and then I would squeeze those together, and that would make this section really fast. Then I could go forward, keyframe this section here, and spread them apart. That would make this section slow. So now I'll go back to the original keyframe. So what happened here, I keyframe a point and a point down here and pulled this one. So this was like down here before. I pulled it in so that the beginning of this transition will be really fast to match the fact that it's coming in fast. And then I grabbed the later point, like maybe let's say I grabbed here, and then dragged it down to where this point is. And that's what made this clip kind of have an ending slowdown. Of course, with the Twixtor, it tried to fill in this one frame here. I noticed it, but I was just like, I'm not gonna keep fighting with getting this clip to have proper slowdown. So it is what it is. Next thing, I have this clip of a train that I took at a train station driving by. All I did was pre-comp this pre-comp here, and then I object map tracked it. So the best way to do that is, so before the track is on there, it looks like this, is because of the fact that it's coming from off the screen, sometimes it's best to kind of start somewhere in the middle. So I start the track from here, and then it's pretty good on figuring out where the object is going, where it's coming from. You may need to tweak it just a little bit if it trips up, which you would do by using your object map tool. So that's disappeared. So when you use it, it'll automatically kind of try to detect what object you're trying to grab. If you do come across any issue where it says that the frame rate doesn't match, you want to make sure that whatever you pre-comped, make sure that the frame rate of the footage you have in there, which in this case, I think this is 59 FPS, but you want to make sure that the pre-comp matches the footage, or else it's going to yell at you and basically say, hey, you can't rotoscope this. If you come across some type of error like that, just send me a message. I'll try to walk you through it because I experience it a lot. But basically, you start from like a middle frame, then make sure it tracks backward properly, then forward. The reason why it's good to have a start from the middle frame is so that it has a better understanding of what it's tracking. If you start too close to the beginning, like say you try to grab it from here, it may not understand what else comes into the frame. But if you do it from the middle, you can understand it going out and understand it coming in. So I mask that, which is like this. And then of course, it's already moving from left to right, so there wasn't really much I needed to do to make that a transition. And then for the end of it here, this is the same train clip. So this first clip is the actual mask clip of the train moving left to right. Then right here, this is just a duplication of this bottom clip, but with no mask, because once it starts passing the screen, I don't need the mask anymore. It's already done its job of covering the layer so that I can start the next transition. At this point, I created, because I wanted to control the train's movements myself, I created a motion tile, which motion tile allows you to extend the borders of your footage just by replicating it. So like if you have, like to say this is your footage, basically it would extend it by doing another version of that footage with the same everything. What you could do is, if you have a footage that's like this, let's say this is your footage and you want to motion tile it, but still, because you want to do some type of motion and want it to look the same, you would mirror the edges, which would make it kind of look like this. And so even when it's moving really fast, it just helps with those kind of movements. So probably wasn't the best example, but so I have this motion tile. I'll put width set to 210, so that extends this, so that when I do this position movement here of moving from right to left, so like I said, I wanted to control the movement at this point. So once I got this far, I duplicated this right here and just cut it here. So this is just right where the clips end, and tail here is just there, but it's covered by this next clip, so it doesn't matter that it's there. But then I was like, all right, I don't need to worry about, because the train was moving slow, I wanted to be a quick wipe. So I motion tiled it to extend it where it just kept repeating itself further of the same clip. And then I just keyframe the position from right to left really fast with the motion blur on the layer turned on. You may notice for all these layers, if you get the project file, that anytime there's like a quick movement or anything of that sort, I do turn on motion blur just because it helps sell it. And of course, once again, a couple of one frames in there. I have a blur directional here. I have a mini max here, there. I have a pixel sorter here, just like that. And then I have another blur directional on this one. And then I have a lens blur, and that is going from 0 to 8, or no, is it 8? To 15, down to 0. That's what helps sell some of these movements, doing a lens blur with a little bit of a exposure flash, so it goes from 0 to 250 back to 0, helps it flash in, and then I have the hot spots going dark to bright. So I noticed that sometimes pairing the hot spots, which kind of darkens the darker parts of a video first, with an exposure to brighten what's left, can give you some really cool effects. So that's what's happening there. Kind of gives it kind of like a nice warp. And then this footage was already dark on the left side, so it kind of just worked with that transition that it was dark. I was able to just keyframe it to move in from right to left. So with some position keyframes here, just like that. I have the graph pretty sharp so that it jumps in, but then slows down to ease into place. And then for the next transition, I duplicated the train clip twice, and in each of them, I masked out the light, and then I used something called, well, first I used Luma Key because I wanted in those two masks to take out anything that might have been in the background. So you can see there, of course, the mask is just gonna be a rough mask around the light. I Luma Keyed it just so I can get just kind of the bright values there. And then I added a deep glow to brighten what was there. So the right one now has no deep glow. Excuse me, left one still does. And then Reshape. Reshape is a cool plugin because basically you can set a mask of one shape and a mask of another and have it transform the mask of that one shape to the other over time. So I then went to this clip and created a mask. Where's that mask now? Here it is. And created a mask around both of those shapes. Well, this is just a mask of the thing. Where is my masks at? 1 second. Here we go. So in my here, so what will probably help is these movements that you see in the footage are not originally there. That was done by nulls. So I will actually, let me move to the end here and disable them for a second. So just so you can see what's happening. So this footage doesn't belong here, right? This is the original footage where it was placed, right here where it's at. What I did was I keyframed it. I made a keyframe of where it should be, but then moved it in a starting keyframe to be close to where the lights on the train were. Right? So that's the mask of the train lights, and then let me turn on the train clip. And that's the train. So I wanted it to be close to where the train was, and then I just literally placed the clip on top of where the lights in the train were. Then I did a remask transition where I took the mask around the light, I created a second mask to match the shape of this light. Then I use a Reshape plugin to have, let me get rid of this now, that light mask, both of them morph into the new shape. It looks really weird without the other layers in there, but. So you see both of those light shapes, so you can kind of probably see it more now, how there's kind of like little flowery shapes around of how I Luma keyed and masked it. But I have both of them reshaping their mask shapes. to match that light there. And then a real quick flash, it's like a blink and you'll miss it transition. So that's what's happening there. And then on the clip with the lights here, I have the same thing. I have the clip with the lights and then a duplicate of it where I masked out just the area where the lights were and added the deep glow to kind of help that flash in occur there. And then once I did that, to help sell with the movement, I created a null keyframe, right? So let's say this is, like I said, right here is where the clip is supposed to be, right? This is how the footage looks right out the camera, as it's sitting here. Just like I said with the other clip where the movement, where you go to the end of the movement, I know that I wanted this train to move into this clip. So I took this clip here and I keyframed it using this null, null 28. So let me go to that null. I used that null, created a keyframe, which is these right here, which I did move further back, but just imagine they're here. It doesn't make a difference. It's just like that. And then I move them. I move the rotation, scale, and everything of the clip to put those lights on top of this train right here. So the clip is cut, but if I put it all the way up here, it's there, right? So this is with it without it. It just comes from right where the train lights are. But obviously, rather than it just appear, so that's probably even a better way to show it. So train light superimposed, boom, just like that. But I wanted it to be gradual. So with this movement, so let me restart and explain this as if this is how I'm editing it live, right? Put in this clip, have it move in from the right. Load in this clip and overlay it over where the train lights are. So it starts from over here. I'm gonna set an end keyframe using the null it's tied to. So I create a null. I link it to that null in 28 and create an end keyframe. Now that the end keyframe's there, it's like, okay, I can leave that there as like a frame of reference. This is where it's supposed to be. Move forward in the clip and move it where I want it to be, which is right over these train lights. Then, if I play it forward, it will just play the train, boom, and go over. But I want it to be gradual. I want to reshape the train lights and have it transition into it. So all I have to do is, I just want to make sure I knew where the keyframe was. All I have to do is move these clips back. If I cut them back and then tell the train clip, or actually, let me show that fully. So if I move these here so that it pops up right over the train, and then I tell the train clip, okay, hey, guess what? Train clip, which is here, you also listen to null 28. Just like the other clip, it's going to listen to the directions going forward. So that means just like how I told this to come from its original position and move backwards to the train position earlier in the clip, I can now tell the train position, hey, go from where you are and follow the lights forward. Now, if I darken the background, key out and luma key out just the lights and have it follow that movement, and then move the keys, move the starting frame of the next clip further back, like this, it will flash into itself. Because now the train starts moving before this clip even reveals itself. So that's how that looks there. Set it back to the original. And there you go. Just unsolo these. So now the train clip, I first had the other footage sit on top of the lights and then move that footage to the right. But then if I tell the train to also follow the movement, but then cut that footage back, the train will start following that movement, but then it just switches to the clip that actually was given the movement. So there you go. And then I think, yeah, that's about it there for that one. Then next here, I noticed that there was these palm trees right here on the top of this footage that I shot. And so I really wanted to just use this other clip that I also shot of the palm trees. So once again, this is just a normal positional wipe. So I have the same nulls, null 27. I have it listed to null 26, which is just a keyframe, just worry about the top one here, of position on the y-axis, moving from up down. Then I went to my palm tree clip and motion tiled it just so that when it moves, it has a reflection at the bottom to help sell the movement. And then just did the reverse. So I had it tied to the null and move from up to down to reveal itself in. And then as you can probably see there, I have a lens blur, exposure, and hotspot set up again, just like earlier in the clip, just to darken it and reveal it. And then I think I have a couple of one frames kind of thrown in there. This one's a mini max, this one's another mini max, and this one's a pixel sorter. So just a bunch of little one frames to help with some drags. For this next section here, these two clips, it was just the clip of the birds in the sky, and then of course the clip of the palm trees. So it was really easy to just do a quick another wipe transition. So all I have happening here is with the same null movements, just because once it's tied to a null, it's just easy to just stick with nulls. I have a position keyframe. So I had this null tied to this one, and because what's listening to this one, now listening to this one, I just tied this one to this one. So now it's gonna follow the same list instructions. So I have this keyframe to move from bottom right to top left, just using some keyframes there. And then once again, to work in reverse, I did this movement, went to the end, keyframe this footage, and then move backwards. And then I just chose a point, which is right here, to have the footage cut. I have a quick blur directional there. I have another blur directional on the out. And then I have this lens blur, I think is part of something else. But yeah, that's what kind of did that there. And then this clip with the birds is time remapped. When it first pops in, it's moving really fast. But then the birds kind of slow down to that slow motion that you see there. And that's what gives that movement. Now, for the keyboard part, this was probably the trickiest part. But once again, I used a lot of VFX assets. So these are them here, placed in different locations with color dodges to kind of give this kind of reveal effect, as well as the actual keyboard itself. And I know plugins galore on this one, but let me get that open here. So this is the actual keyboard footage itself. One, I have a gradient wipe revealing it. I have a temp to make it black and white. So gradient wipe, same thing as before, it's just a transition in and out. You can change the softness of it, which is what I did to make it, when it reveals things, kind of, I honestly don't know the logic that it uses, but I know you can set a gradient to it. It's a gradient to itself, so I think it just goes by luma value, but I have it transitioning in to reveal. And then I have, let me actually show these one by one and get rid of display since I'm not using it. Then I have it matted, so the object matte, which is rotoscoping it out. So that's what it looks like so far. And then the vector blur, I mean, we know what the vector blur does. I just love using that. And then the Gaussian blur is helping kind of give it a softness. And then the flow motion, which I don't think I ended up actually using flow motion. No, so we can ignore that one. So that's what kind of does that reveal there, coupled with the VFX assets sitting on top of it, and then everything being blending mode color dodge to the background. And then using some nulls, which it's complex to explain a lot of these nulls back to back, but essentially I have, so let's say this footage is here, right? But I want it to kind of move in. I keyframe using a null. I track the footage to follow the null, turning to the right and zooming in. And then in the reverse, I keyframe this footage to follow the null going backwards, keying opposite right and zooming out. And then when you put them together, it kind of jumps into the clip like that. And then of course, this side I already explained with the VFX overlaying over the gradient reveal and the color dodging, coupled with, I think there's a exposure, there's exposure in here somewhere. There's a little bit of flow motion there, but I think the flow motion here was just to start sucking in and reveal out to help it kind of blossom out like that. And then up here, here it is. I have a shake and a motion tile. So to help with that transition be more smooth rather than just zoom in, a little bit of shake is added. All I messed with was the amplitude, X value 71, Y value 67, didn't touch Z value, and then tilt value is 5. And I have the phase at the 0, frequency is 2, really slow shake, just kind of give it a little bit of a wobble in a circle almost as it zooms in. Probably could have did a sharper shake, but it didn't really fit the vibe of this edit that I was doing. So that's how it comes in. And then on the reveal, once again, you love the turbulent displace. So I have a shockwave here, shockwave VFX. That's with a color dodge to help have that reveal there, as well as some more VFX assets that are just laid over it with color dodging. Some of the same ripples are finishing their movements. And then down here, I have the actual clip. So before I started with the first half of the clip was cut with just the keyboard masked out, but then on the reveal, it's not masked out because I want to just reveal the entire clip now. The keyboard's already coming in. I have my turbulent displace, same setup as I mentioned in there earlier. You want to keyframe your amount high and then have it slowly go down to help reveal, and then keyframe your evolution over time so that the turbulent displace doesn't look boring. I have hotspots starting from dark to light to reveal the keyboard as it comes in. And then I have a displacement map, and you'll see why I have that in a second. So that's that movement. And part of it was VFX, but honestly, some of the look of this clip is because I actually have a PMI Smoke Ninja Pro, I think it's called. And I recorded this clip actually months ago, but I basically used the, what is that preset called? Whatever it is that has a very dense fog bubbles, and I just put that over the keyboard. And this was a clip that I was used for something else of me like waving that dust, that like thick fog that was on it off of it. So a lot of that movement is actually not VFX. I quite literally just had fog on the keyboard sitting on it that I wiped off. So that's what you're seeing there. Just a couple of asses over it, but that's kind of really what helped sell that was the real life fog sitting on it. So that's what I'm wiping here in this next part. Now, for this next transition, I had to pre-comp this because there was so much going on. So we'll jump into that pre-comp real quick. So I have a clip here of some waves. That's what the clip looks like. So first, swing them in order. I have the fast flipper. These waves are going from left to right. The hand is going right to left, so I had to flip the footage. This was the real footage. This is the footage now. Motion tile. This is so that as I make any shakes or movements, the edges are filled in by a replica of the same footage reversed. Dissolve Luma. That is the Dissolve plugin I use to reveal the waves based on their luminance value. So the brightest stuff reveals first. And then Displacer, no displacer on this one. Displacer is on the other clip. So that's all that's happening here. That's revealing the waves. But then I have the waves time remap to be fast jump in and then move slow in the end. And then they have a little bit of a speed jump here to match the beat, but that's what's happening there. Fast jump in, remap. And then I have the position and scale and rotation and all that stuff moving to match literally every single frame along with the hand, which I'll reveal that now. So each following the hand in every single frame, right? And then on the hand, we'll solo that. The hand has hotspots to darken it as it goes away, turbulent displace for the same reason as before, and then a displacement map with the displacement map layer set to the wave layer. And by doing that and setting it to the luminance, I'm actually able to have the ripples of the waves start to appear using the displacement map to kind of reveal the waves here. So with that coupled with the clip itself, and then that's in the pre-comp, and then on top of the pre-comp, I have, look at my keyframes here, I have this plugin called RSMB Pro, which is real smart motion blur, and that gives the footage an additional kind of oomph of motion blur to help with anything that's moving. So that is cut up just a little bit to 0.50 right when the movement's happening, then it very quickly goes away. That just helps sell the movement there. So all those together is what gives the ripples over the keyboard as it comes in, the wave crashing in with the hand, and then transition carrying through. So it's very tedious, but all those components coming together gives that transition. And then for the outro, one frame, one frame, one frame, one frame, one frame, one frame, reveal. And that's just using a quick scale map. So this is mapped to a null. That null was set to scale zoom in. And then of course, I would load in this clip right here at this playhead, have it linked to the null so that if I move backwards, it follows movement in reverse and scales moving out. That's basically the edit. But I am going to do another breakdown of specifically kind of the null sequence that I mentioned, because it helps with motion graph to know how to do that kind of backwards and forwards tracking of having your nulls follow each other forward and backwards. As well as I'm also going to do one on nulls and them having to helping with smooth motion graph in general. So one video on having smooth motion graph and then another one on this kind of forward and backward null setup that I'm discussing, because this video is already going really long for me to discuss that all in this video. But that's about it. And if there's any questions on how I do any of these or anything I can expound upon, just because I know that there's just so much to take in with this in itself, just reach out to me and I can help you with it.